Greetings, my fellow humanoid dwellers. I create videos on technology and other random things. If you like this video, you might like others. If you don't like this video, you still might like others. Consider subscribing to my channel or checking out my Patreon page. If you already subscribe, hit that bell. In future videos, we're going to start doing some website coding. We're going to be coding in a few different languages. I wanted to give kind of a mile-high view of our configuration and a little description on the types of files and how they work before we start that. Our initial configuration, we're going to have a home PC that gets its IP address through DHCP. We'll need 3 programs installed on the PC. A web browser, I'm going to use Firefox. Sometimes I'll use Chrome, sometimes I'll use IE, just depends. We're going to use PuTTY to connect to the Raspberry Pi, and we haven't discussed this yet, but eventually we'll be using FileZilla or some other FTP type service to send files between the home PC and the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi is going to be connected through the network. The Raspberry Pi is going to contain some programs also, but on the Raspberry Pi they're called services. Apache is the main service. We installed it. It's the service that receives requests from the home PC and responds with different files. MySQL is a service that runs in the background, and it will store data for us. It'll take us a little while to get to MySQL, but we'll get there. SSH is the service that PuTTY connects to so that we can talk to the Raspberry Pi. We'll install an FTP service at a later date so it'll make it easier to transmit files back and forth. To start with, though, we're going to go ahead and connect through SSH using PuTTY and just alter the files that are currently on the Raspberry Pi itself. There are different types of files used when you create web pages. The main type you'll hear of are called HTML files, and their file name always ends with a .htm or a .html. They contain text. They may contain things like checkboxes or input fields or login forms, but they can't actually accomplish anything without other files tied to them. When you want to make the text files look nice, you give them styles. Sometimes people put the styles within the HTML or HTML files, but it is better to add another file called a CSS file. And with CSS files, the file names always end in .css. And if they're external to the HTML files, there will be a line in the HTML file that points to the location of the CSS file. And the CSS file is what defines what the HTML looks like. Like you can make the borders a certain size, or the backgrounds or background colors, or pick the fonts of text. They can also do boxes and rounded corners, and you can do all sorts of things with CSS. Using a CSS file, you can do some forms of animation. But mainly when you get into running actions or having your website do things, you'll use scripting languages. The scripting language we're going to use is called JavaScript. It's the action. It happens on what's called the client side, and we'll get to that in a minute. JavaScript is what makes the action happen. When you submit the form, or when you validate a form, like if you enter an email address wrong and it says try again, usually that's done in JavaScript. There are other scripting languages that can be used, but we're going to focus on JavaScript. Another language that we're going to look at is called PHP, and it's an action. It's a scripting language just like JavaScript, only it happens on the server side. And then the final type of thing that we'll be using is the MySQL data. That's where you'll store the data, such as usernames or login information, or if you're selling items on a store, they're usually stored in some sort of a database. There's lots of different types of databases. We're going to focus on MySQL. Now the difference between server side and client side is your Raspberry Pi is the server and the home PC is the client side. When you are on your home computer and you type in a website, or for our examples you're going to use an IP address, and then a backslash and then a file name, it's going to go over to the Raspberry Pi. It's going to use Apache, and Apache is going to say, oh, it wants this file. It's going to take the file, it's going to take the CSS file and the JavaScript file, and all three of these can be seen by the PC. That's why it's called the client side. Whereas these two, the PHP files and the MySQL data, will stay on the server side. Any action the PHP scripting language wants to do with the HTML file must be done prior to the file going to the client. Where a JavaScript action can happen after the file has been sent to the client, such as clicking a button and having a pop-up box, things like that. Those are JavaScript. PHP takes care of things on the other side. That's a rough look at the configuration we're going to have over the next few videos. Thanks for watching.